All right. Well, it is 7 o'clock, and so we're just going to get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Bender. I am your new adult program coordinator here at the Schaumburg Township District Library. Welcome to tonight's program with William Hazelgrove about the race to save the Titanic, his forthcoming book. Before we get started, I just wanted to start with a few things. First, if you have any questions, you can either type them into the chat or the Q&A box, and then William will address them at the end of the presentation. So feel free, as you get a question, to type them into the box so it stays fresh in your mind and we can address it later. Second, the library is doing a survey. We're in the middle of our strategic planning process, and we would really appreciate it if you would go and check out our website and fill out a survey. It will not take too much of your time, but it will help us bring you the programs and services that you want in your community, because that's what we're here to do, provide for you. Please go to schaumburglibrary.org/survey to fill it out. And again, it won't take too much of your time. All right, that is enough business. Let's get to tonight's program. William Hazelgrove is the national best-selling author of 10 novels and 7 nonfiction titles. His books have received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Booklist, Book of the Month selections, ALA Editor Choice Awards, Junior Library Guild selections, Literary Guild selections, History Book Club selections, and optioned for movies. He was the Ernest Hemingway writer in residence, where he wrote in the attic of Ernest Hemingway's birthplace. He has written articles and reviews for USA Today, the Smithsonian Magazine, and other publications that have been featured on NPR as All Things Considered. The New York Times, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, C-SPAN, USA Today have all covered his books with features. His books Tobacco Stinks, The Pitcher, Real Santa, and Madam President have been options for screen and television rights. His book, Madam President, The Secret Presidency of Edith Wilson, is currently in development. He has 4 forthcoming books: Sally Rand, American Sex Symbol, Morristown, The Kidnapping of George Washington, The Brilliant Con of Cassie Chadwick, and 160 Minutes, The Race to Save the Titanic, which is the program we will be doing tonight. Take it away, William.
Oh, great. Thank you, Matt. Thanks everybody for coming. This will be a lot of fun. Yeah, this book is out actually September 1st. So we're really getting a sneak preview here, but of course you can get it now. Also, if you want to get a raffle off, just send me an email to bhazelgrove@gmail on your screen there. You don't have to put anything in there. Just put raffle in the subject line, and I will put you in there. Okay, so let's jump right in here. If we were all in person, too bad we aren't, but we will be someday soon. I would ask you, who saw the movie Titanic? And everybody would raise their hands, most people. Great movie, loved it myself, seen it many, many times. But there is a mythology that comes with Titanic, and that's kind of what I do with my books. I sort of cut through a mythology and try and tell the real story as best I can from primary sources that I can find. So I do the Wright brothers, Teddy Roosevelt, Al Capone, the 33 World's Fair, Madam President. So because there's a real story there that lurks at the bottom of all this mythology. Mythology is actually great because it makes for great stories and great movies and all that. But actually, it's more fascinating to know what really, really happened. So Titanic mythology began very early, right when it sank. The mythology just started right there. One reason was because during this time, people were not used to having massive catastrophes like this. Unfortunately, we are more used to it, but they weren't. So in actual fact, they had to sort of create a mythology to justify it. And that sort of started to paper over what really happened. So let's talk a little bit about mythology, and then let's jump right in to what really happened on April 14th, 1912. So let's start with this. Actually, there's a fisherman off of New Jersey, and he was fishing along, and he suddenly found this bottle floating around the gunwale of his boat with a note inside, the classic, note in the bottle. He opens it up, and it says, "From Titanic, goodbye all, Burke of Glanmire, Cork." Wow, pretty amazing. This guy who his boat's going down, and he throws off this bottle into eternity to tell the world what happened. The problem is, there's no Burke of Glanmire, Cork on Titanic. He doesn't exist. He's not in the records of anything. Maybe it was a stowaway, but highly doubtful. And then all these bottles started to pop up everywhere with different notes. But it didn't matter. This note actually made it into a lot of histories. So it became part of mythology. And it didn't really matter at a point if it was true or not. Burke of Glanmire, Cork lives on. Now, the mythology really began with the building of the boat. I mean, look at the size of this thing. It's the largest ship in the world over time. And so the mythology began right away, which also began with she's unsinkable. We've heard this 100 times. The Titanic was unsinkable. And this comes from a lot of different things we'll talk about. But also, this was their shuttle, if you will. This was the cutting edge of technology for their time. And these liners. And this was putting everything they had into it, the largest liner in the world, the most luxurious, and the most cutting edge technology in terms of safety. So when the mythology was handed down, one thing with mythology I can tell you from doing the Wright brothers book, Wright brothers are on story, is that it grows and everybody adds to it. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so then what's really true is submerged under all this mythology. So it finally ended up, on the big screen in a very modern movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and it's a great movie. It's loaded with tons of Titanic mythology. Now, actually, a lot of the mythology began here with Walter Lord. He was a copywriter in New York. And he decided he wanted to write a book on Titanic. So what did he do? He went live. He was very lucky that way. And so then he wrote his book. By the way, this book is only 112 pages. Not very long. I mean, I was sort of amazed because I read it as a kid and then I reread it for this book. And I was like, wow, this is really short. But it reads like a novel. It is a novel. It's just one account after another. It's sort of voyeuristic, you are their account. And so, this became the floor. When this book came out, this became the floor for every book that followed. A lot of books would take on different aspects of Titanic, different angles, but at the bottom, somewhere lurking down in the depths of Titanic was Walter Lord's book. And a lot of the same stories were recycled through all these books. You can always find them almost. You go, oh, that's from Walter Lord's book. And, it wasn't so much that he was wrong. It's just what he decided to focus on. He decided to focus on the survivor stories. Now, look at these people. They are clearly first class. They are picked up on the Carpathia. This is actually a honeymoon couple, right? They don't look any worse to wear. They're obviously got in one of the boats, floated around for a while, got picked up by Carpathia, and you can see them here. They're probably like, now what? There goes our honeymoon. But so he focused on these survivors, and this sort of set his view of Titanic. But there is a real story of Titanic, and that's what we're talk about tonight. And that's now this picture because again, this is the time they had tons of horses that would be in line to yank them over to the shipyard. So the mythology was just begging to be told, but we're going to have to go right back to that night, April 14, 1912, and tell the real story. Okay, so here we go. 11:40 a.m. Titanic hits a 500 billion ton iceberg. 500 billion tons. That would be like running to the Empire State Building with a tricycle. The tricycle clearly loses. Titanic clearly lost on this. Now, saying that, if Titanic had bashed directly into the iceberg straight on and not tried to turn, not reversed its engines, which she did, she would have floated because she would have caved in her bow, But Titanic could float with up to 4 compartments flooded. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And so maybe the first or second compartment would have flooded, but she actually would have survived. But because she turned, the iceberg tore open her waterline, or 20 feet below her waterline, like a can opener. Now, most passengers heard nothing. They were, I've been on many cruises, and basically Titanic was a cruise. So you have a huge meal, have about 6 or 7 courses. You maybe go to a show, have a few brandies, maybe a cigar, and then you go to bed. And it was a bitterly cold night. Also, it was extremely calm. It was so calm on the Atlantic Ocean that you couldn't see where the stars began and where they ended because they were reflected off the horizon into the water. So most people were in their bed with their electric heater in their state under their White Star blanket. But some people heard that iceberg ripping along the bottom of Titanic. One woman said it sounded like the sound of calico tearing. Another person said it felt like a low grinding. Somebody else said it sounded like marbles being thrown across the floor. Lawrence Beasley, a teacher, said that he could tell they'd hit something because the water glass next to his bed suddenly shook and the water jumped up. It was like a big shudder went through the ship. So what happens at 11:41? The watertight doors close. All right, so this is the reason, one of the reasons Titanic was called unsinkable, because they had these watertight doors. The way they worked was they're electric, cutting edge, and the minute you press the button, which they did on the bridge, the doors went up and sealed off the bulkheads. Now, the problem is the watertight bulkheads didn't go all the way up through the ship. Titanic could float with 4 compartments flooded. It cannot float with 5. And here's why. Basically, the water comes in, fills up the bulkhead, all right, then goes up, all right, as it tilts down, okay? So if it's 4, it wouldn't tilt down far enough for that water to keep coming in. At 5 bulkheads flooded, all right, it's, even though the watertight doors are closed, it starts going like this. Well, since the watertight doors did not go all the way up, the water rises up, floods the first compartment over into the second. Think of you sitting in your living room and all the water goes piling into the room next to your living room, even though you got the door shut, right? Eventually that water is going to go up and over the ceiling and come falling down on you from the ceiling in your living room while you're watching television, probably watching Titanic. That's what happened here. The water came in, it pulled the nose of Titanic down like a big weight, and it went rise up and then up, like kind of water going upstairs, went up and over, up and over, up and over. Now, again, 4, they would have been fine. 5 was a death sentence. Now, when they found this ship in 1985, okay, Ballard found in 1985 in the bottom of the Atlantic, they sent robots down there, and one of them they sent down was a sonar robot because they wanted to see what that bow looked like. Now, Titanic, when she went down, dug down into the sand, right? Because she was moving really fast, plunging down 2 miles. They want to see where those holes are. So this robot shoots basically, and sure enough, they can see the slits. And there were 6 slits 20 feet below the waterline. And that's what allowed Titanic to fill up with 39,000 tons of water that pulled her down in 160 minutes. Name of my butt, 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's all they had. That's all the time they had, 160 minutes. So the race is really on to get to Titanic before she sinks. Okay, so at 12:05, Captain Smith orders the lifeboats uncovered. Let's talk about Captain Smith a little. In the newspapers, he was painted as very, in history books, he was painted as very heroic, giving orders, all this stuff. Actually, Captain Smith was in shock. Why? Because he had given an interview maybe a few months before saying, I've never had any problem on the high seas. I don't expect any. That is all past. Ships are too well built, too safe now for anything untoward to happen, like a ship sinking. Well, guess what? His ship was sinking. This was his final voyage. He was retiring, right? He should have retired before this one, right? But this was going to be the capstone of his career. He's taking the most luxurious, fastest, biggest ship to New York, right? And that would be it. And he was going to set a speed record too. So he would clipping along, all right? He would never believe that hitting an iceberg would undo him, or that the ship could not weather it and not sink. When Mr. Andrews, the architect, told him the ship, she will founder, as he said, and you maybe have a couple hours. He didn't believe him. He couldn't get in his head. So he did not immediately order the lifeboats uncovered. In fact, his officers had to say, Captain, we should uncover the lifeboats. And he finally nodded yes, but because he just wasn't there. And in the newspapers, they had him saying stuff like, "Be British, boys, rescuing a baby." All this was made up. So then at 12:10, though, he kind of gets it all together and he takes action. Now, my book centers around quite a bit of wireless telegraphy. Okay. Morse code sent wirelessly. All right. This was cutting edge technology. This was the internet of their time. It was the personal computer of their time. Think back in the early days of Apple, where a few people had, snapped together, Apple IICs and things like that. This was the cutting edge technology, and the Titanic had the most powerful set that you could put on a ship. Problem was the captains, like Captain Smith, didn't really believe in it. It was sort of a gadget, gizmo. The guys who ran it worked for actually Marconi. They didn't even work for the White Star Line, so they were sort of doing their own thing. Sort of like computer nerds were probably in the beginning. People are like, "What are you talking about, bits and bytes?" These guys worked in their own world. So Captain Smith goes down to what's called the silent room, and that's the wireless room. I call it the silent room because it has to be insulated against sound, so they can hear these beeps and dashes and dots coming in. All right. Also, they're using direct current, not alternating current. Today we use AC. They use DC, and they use super amped up DC so they could blast out their signals a long way. And this would emit a tremendous crack when they push down on the key. So that was also why it was insulated. So anyway, so Smith goes down there and he says, "Listen, put out a CQD, which means come quick distress." They also put out SOS, but that was sort of the news signal. CQD was the standard. So the operators, there's two of them, and Titanic is also, brags that they can send out messages 24 hours a day because they have two operators, 24-hour service. Most of the messages the operators deal with are passenger messages, okay? Now, they were getting lots of ice warnings before Titanic hit this berg, and they were getting them up to the bridge and stuff. But again, they were sort of like, "Oh, here's another ice warning by the guy, wireless telegraphy guys. Huh? Okay, maybe we'll alter the ship a little, but you know what? There's always ice." So again, it wasn't viewed as this instrument to make the ship safer. It was viewed as this gizmo that actually first-class passengers paid a lot of money to send messages out all the way back to New York. By the way, during the day, it only went about 500 miles. At night, though, they could transmit 2,000 miles. Why? Because they didn't know why. They just did it. But the real reason was it would bounce off the ionosphere. So these signals would go up, bounce off the ionosphere, and bounce back down to, say, New York or somewhere. Harold Bride, he's the other junior operator. So these two guys are the ones that Smith went down and said, "Look, send out CQ. We hit an iceberg." Right? 12:15, they send it out. Now, this is an actual picture, okay, of the wireless room. It's double exposed, so it's not a great picture. That's Jack Phillips sitting there sending away. And the minute they get it, they don't stop. They just keep sending it out. Because here's the thing. It's not like us when we dial somebody on our cell phone or, before cell phones, you dial a number and get somebody. That is directional. It goes right to a particular person. All they could do with wireless telegraphy at this point was blast it out and hope somebody picked it up. It was actually the ultimate sharing because somebody would pick it up and then they'd relay it on. All right. So this was very crude, and also it didn't allow you to know who was actually getting your signals. And we're going to talk about that a lot because all sorts of people got Titanic signals. People you wouldn't believe got Titanic's first signals. And so, you like to think, oh, these are really kind of clear dots and dashes and things like that. But in actual fact, they're sort of hard to decipher. So let's see if we can listen in on what these things sounded like. Let me see if this will fire up here. Let's see here. Oh, okay. That doesn't look right. Maybe I'm not going to be able to get it in a webinar. So let's take 10. Okay, here we go. So that's what actually it sounded like. All right, that was the actual sound of those transmissions. And by let's see if I can stop that. Okay. Actually, they said, can't hear for the steam. Now I got a question a lot of, hey, was the band really playing? Okay, so they have on Titanic like 20 boilers. And these boilers are all brought up to full steam, especially, Titanic, because they wanted to make this great record of getting, from Ireland all the way over to New York in record time. So they develop all this steam. Well, when they hit the iceberg, they had to stop. And so all that steam's still sitting in those boilers. So what they do, they have to release it or these will blow up. So they open up all the boilers at once and it blasts out the funnels of Titanic. The people on board said it sounded like 100 locomotives in a railroad station. You couldn't hear yourself think. So all the best people could do, especially people loading the boats, was use hand signals. That's something that doesn't make it into the movies or anything else, because first of all, it wouldn't make for a great movie, just have all the steam blasting away. But also it pushes out the whole band thing. The whole band's playing as they go down. Or maybe they came back. There's a woman who was interviewed in 1965, one of the survivors. And they asked her, they said, did the band play? She said, that's ridiculous. She goes, first of all, it's too cold. Second of all, the instruments would have broke. Third of all, the boat was at such a slant, they would have slid right down. But fourth of all, it's the steam. So, maybe they came out and snuck out there and played, who knows? All right, now, like I said, Titanic can broadcast 2,000 miles at night. Okay, this is a very rare photo. Why? Because it's the only one that shows the antenna on top of Titanic. That didn't make it into the movie either. Right? That's those 4 parallel wires. Those very high wires up there allowed Titanic to talk to a lot of people. And so, like I said, she had a powerful Marconi set that they could come up with. Now, okay, so they send out the CQD, don't know who's going to get it. Now, there's shore stations. There's one off of Nova Scotia, right, about 400 miles away. And these shore stations are studies in isolation. They're cold. People sleep there. Cold food. They try to keep a fire going, but they have to be on the edge of the shore to pick up these signals. You see the antenna behind them. All right, so it quiets down, and the 2 adults of the station in Nova Scotia go, we're going to go out and work on the diesel. Now they have a diesel motor to generate power. It powers a generator, and they need a lot of power to send out this direct current. They leave a guy named Jimmy Merrick, a 14-year-old boy. They say, just sit there and monitor. So he does. And he sits there, and he didn't hear anything for a long time, and suddenly he starts to hear signals, so he starts to decipher them. And he can't believe what he's hearing. He can't believe it. What's coming in just blows him away. CQD, this is Titanic. It gives his position. Frankfurt to Titanic. What's the matter? Because that's a German ship. And this is, again, this demonstrates wireless telegraphy. It starts bouncing across and hitting all sorts of shit. This is Titanic. It gives us position. Stand by. This is Titanic. And then the Mount Temple comes. Now the Mount Temple comes away from Titanic. They said, what's the matter? Titanic, can't read you one, but here's my position. Come at once and struck a berg. Received will tell Cap. So now they can't hear him saying that, but we know he said it because we have the transcript. Now Jimmy Merrick listens to all this. He tells the two adults. They can't believe it. They come in and confirm it. And then they turn to Jimmy Merrick and they say, listen, never tell anybody that you were in here alone, that we had gone out because we lose our jobs. And Jimmy Merrick keeps his word. He waits until these gentlemen have died, and in 1970s, he gives a radio interview, basically saying, "I heard Titanic first as a 14-year-old boy." So there's a lot of these things where strange people end up getting Titanic's first signals. Now, this is showing location of Mount Temple in relation to Titanic on this little graph. The Parisian's actually closer, but she doesn't have the wireless capability. She's not picking anything up. You can see the Burma further off to Frankfurt, and then you can see the Carpathia. Now, again, wireless was the internet of the time, and all sorts of people had sets, sort of like shortwave radios. There's a lot of hobbyists and stuff that are always out there listening to things. And again, early days of personal computer, the internet, it belonged to a lot of people. A lot of young people have sets. But for the first class, right, passengers, this was great. You could send a telegram to Joe in New York, say, hey, I'll meet you for lunch when we get in. Hey, you should be on the Titanic, old sport. And here's the big thing. At night, they would get in all this news from the shore stations. Okay, the wireless operators, right? Harold Bride, Jack Phillips would get in all this news. And then the newspaper, the ship had a printing press. So then they would have their own newspaper. So when people got up in the morning, having their croissant and their coffee, they could read the newspaper and find out what's going on in the world, which was amazing to people. In the middle of the ocean, you find out maybe how the Chicago Cubs or the White Sox are doing. So people were just amazed at this. So the call goes out, CQD, and then they use SOS as well. Right now, this is a reproduction here. Titanic's wireless room. It's a clear rainy for either there. They have the step up oscillator on the left, and it's the technology of the time. And this is their personal computer. So these signals shoot out across the Atlantic. And this is a great old drawing, actually, showing all ships that were around Titanic. Now, part of the mythology of Titanic is that it was all alone out there. That they were out in the great darkness of the Atlantic, and there was nothing anybody could do for them. And they just went down. And so the heroism lied with the captain, the crew, and the passengers. But in fact, you look at this picture, and there's ships all around them at varying distances. But they were getting the signals. All right, now Olympic is her sister ship. Okay, so Olympic actually gets a message from New York telling them about Titanic, saying we struck an iceberg. But she's 500 miles from Titanic. She can do nothing. But she has a very powerful set too, and so she sort of acts as a relay. Now, let's talk about lifeboats. Okay, now these are the actual lifeboats that were taken off Titanic and brought to New York, and that's what you see. This is at New York. Look at these. Look how enforced they are, reinforced, because we're going to talk about this. Also, look at how large they are. Each boat could hold up to 75 people. All right, so these were very substantial boats. All right, these are very substantial lifeboats, and yet I'll just give you a teaser here. Many of them weren't even half full. We'll talk about that now. All right, a little bit more about telegraphy. If you were on top of a ship, if your ship comes across another one, and you decide to send out a signal, you're going to jam them. You're going to cut right over them because your signal is going to be very strong on top of theirs. Sort of like an old party line, right? Everybody's on this frequency. Actually, they're a different frequency, but everybody sort of went to the same commercial frequencies to communicate, and so people would step all over each other. Okay. There's a ship called the California, and it's only 10 miles away from the Titanic. A guy named Captain Lord, he's the commander. Now, Captain Lord is that old-time captain. He's imperious, his word is law, and he hates wireless. Why? Because wireless brought in another authority. Before, captains could marry people, put people in jail. They're the ultimate authority at sea. When wireless came in, they were no longer the ultimate authority. There was somebody else yakking on the other end of the line that could actually countermand them. And so he doesn't really trust wireless to begin with. But as they're sailing along, they hit the ice field that Titanic's in. And he stops the ship. He's like, I'm not going any further. This is going to endanger my ship. I'm going to shut down for the night. So he does. He just shuts it all down. Now, his wireless operator knows Titanic's in the area. And he took a message for you. And they hit the iceberg. Jack Phillips jumps out of his chair because California's closed. And it just blasts him out of his ears. And he says, shut up, you're jamming me. All right. Now, we think it's pretty rude, but actually they use this parlance a lot, because it was like, don't talk to me now. And so which is only 10 miles from the Titanic, goes to sleep, basically. Sets off, they're just drifting, and then they're shut down. Basically, the ship is just floating along. Now, it gets worse. They put the lifeboat passengers into the boats, and they tell them, see that light there? See that light? Row toward it. You can see the California. In fact, they're using their lights, and sending out semaphore signals to it. Okay, and they're dead certain that this boat's going to see them and come toward them. And so they're saying to the people in the passengers, the first class passengers who are getting the boats, hey, row right toward that light. They'll pick you up. And people do. We have tons of accounts of all these passengers who start rowing toward that light. Now, 40 miles away, triage uncovered all their boats, gotten out blankets, brandy, all this stuff. Why? To get ready to rescue all these Titanic passengers. Because they can get there in time. And Captain Moore is the captain, and he knows this. And so they're coming straight for Titanic now. They're the first ones to get it, get the information, and they're on the hunt to make this rescue. Now, at 12:25, the Carpathia is 50 miles away. And he too turns the ship around and starts to head Titanic. All right, full speed. Again, diverts all the steam to the engines, takes the heat away from his passengers, hot water from his passengers, sets up triage stations, puts out extra lookouts, because he's going to have to zigzag through all these icebergs because he's coming as fast as he can. And he really wants to try and get there and get it before Titanic goes down. Now, Wanamaker's department store saw the Marshall Fields of their time in Manhattan. So in Manhattan, cold night. On top of that skyscraper there is a wireless room for Wanamakers. And that's because Mr. Wanamaker decided it would be neat to be able to give customers the opportunity to send messages. Okay, yeah, sort of a gimmick. But at night, he puts up a little 20-something named David Sarnoff to sit up there. Maybe somebody will want to send a message, who knows? Well, Sarnoff's bored. He's falling asleep because there's nothing really going on. And that's sort of the way it was with wireless. I mean, you would catch sort of errant messages. A lot of times, they were strange. A lot of times you couldn't decipher them. So Sarnoff is sitting up there, and suddenly he starts to hear messages from way out on the Atlantic. Now remember, these signals can bounce around 2,000 miles at night, and then get picked up by shore stations relay. So suddenly he starts getting into all this chatter about Titanic sinking, and he can't believe it. He just can't believe it. He goes, he runs and tells everyone. He runs and tells the New York Times, which, by the way, is not the New York Times we know. It's just another one of the papers trying for marketplace. But Titanic's going to make the New York Times the preeminent paper. Now, in New Jersey, it's a cold, rainy night. And some boys have a wireless set. They strung an antenna up on the roof from the chimney to a tree. The parents are in bed. There's a Model T outside, and all the lights are off in the house, and they're huddled around the set. This is like their personal computer. So, or their phone. So they have fun. They just try and pick up whatever they can pick up, hear something. They've heard things before that were pretty remarkable. And this night, they start to hear something really remarkable. They start to hear the Titanic is sinking. Come quickly, CQD, come quickly, distress. They run and tell their parents. Their parents say, don't be ridiculous. That ship is unsinkable. Unsinkable. And they say, no, it's sinking. We have it here. And the parents don't know Morse code. They're like, you're mistaken, And so they stay up listening to this, but they are one of the first, these boys in New Jersey, to hear the Titanic was sinking. Now, at 12:45, Titanic starts to shoot up rockets. Okay, so now the California, Captain Lord's gone to bed, like everybody else on that ship, except for the officers on the bridge. And the officers on the bridge notice this ship, this very lit up ship on the horizon, and they notice it's at a strange angle. And they comment on it and bring Captain Lord up, and he looks, and he says, no. He goes, that's probably a Russian fishing trawler. He goes down and asks the wireless man, any ships in the area? And the wireless man says, only Titanic. Lord shakes his head, no, that's not Titanic. And he goes back up, and they watch it for a while, and then he goes back downstairs. Then the officers see rockets going off. Now, rockets at sea mean one thing only, distress. Come quickly, rescue us. It doesn't matter what color they are. So they call down to Lord, who's down in his berth again, and they say, there's rockets going off of this ship. Lord says, what color are they? And they say, they're white. He says, well, let me know if anything changes. Now, the logic of this is not there, because any rocket is a distress rocket. But this is what Lord says. And Lord is imperious. He's basically the dictator of the ship, okay? He's older, the officers are younger, they aren't gonna cross him. So they stay there watching these rockets go off in this strange lit up ship that seems like it's sinking from the angle they can see, because they're only 10 miles away. Meanwhile, Carpathia is coming at full speed. Determined to get there and take as many people as he can. Now, all these boats, who are they full of? They're full of first class passengers. Okay, the third class is not making the cut. All right, there's not enough lifeboats. There's only 20 lifeboats, 18, 2 collapsibles. Not near enough for the 2,200 and change people. They never give you a real count, by the way, with Titanic. You're never quite sure how many people are actually on that ship. So the first class passengers are sort of just rowing away and then stopping. Some are rowing toward the light that we talked about, but a lot of them just sort of watching Titanic upend itself. Then they start to hear shots. This is something that didn't really make in the movie in a small way. But in actual fact, when the third class passengers came up top, mayhem developed on Titanic. Why? Because they realized there was only a few boats left and most people weren't going to get in them. So it became every man for himself. So up to 12 people were shot. We know this from letters later on, trying to keep order. So, basically pandemonium, but you can't blame them. This ship is going up to almost a vertical angle, and there's no way off. At 2 a.m., Captain Smith tells Bride and Phillips, Jack, Bride, Jack Phillips, you're done. You do everything you can do. It's every man for himself. And so, these two wireless operators who are literally hanging on because the ship's at such an angle and water's coming into the wireless room, stay at their posts and keep transmitting. Why? Because there's still power in the ship, and also they might find a ship that's close. They can get there in time. Again, they're just sending these signals out over and over, CQD, SOS, CQD, SOS, CQD, SOS, just as many times as they can, because you never know, there might be somebody who can actually get there. On the far side of the ice field, the other side from California, Captain Moore and the Mount Temple approach the ice field. Now, Captain Moore is a very conservative captain. He's been with the company a long time. He doesn't take risks. And he hits this ice field, the Titanic sitting there. Now, he had told all the passengers they were not allowed up top. But some of the passengers sneak up top on the Mount Temple. And that's what they see. They see less than 5 miles away a ship sinking, shooting off rockets. And they can't believe their eyes. They just can't believe it. The crew sees it too. And Captain Moore is not ready to rescue them. They've got the lifeboats uncovered, they got everything going, and yet Captain Moore will go no further. He will not take a ship into the ice field. The crew actually considers mutiny. And the passengers are dumbfounded. They just stare at the ship that is upending itself, shooting off rockets. Meanwhile, in the California, officers can't believe it. As may tell, can't even come to the bridge. He calls it a mystery ship. He says that's a mystery ship. That's probably a ship that's illegally fishing. That's not the Titanic. Captain Rostrom puts all his steam into the engines, and he's coming full speed, and he's having the zigzag around all sorts of icebergs, risking everything to get there as the Titanic sinks, while the first class passengers sit and watch dumbfounded. Now, a lot of the passengers didn't report it splitting in two, like we know. Some did, some didn't, but they were in shock. And the Titanic's clearly going down now. And the officers on the Titanic, they give up on Lord. He's not going to change his mind. And they just watch while Captain Lord sleeps as the Titanic sinks in front of them. And the people have still been trying to row toward the lights of the California, but they can get no closer. Why? Because California's drifting. He's not coming closer, he's drifting further away. And so they give up and go back to Titanic. And on the Mount Temple, passengers and crew or down the verses and seeing the ship with these rockets going off, Moore puts his ship in reverse and backs away. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, Titanic sinks, splits in half, as we know now, we see in the movie, and goes down. They said the sound was unbelievable because everything, engines, everything became unmoored as the Titanic split, upended itself. And the reason it split is it was never designed to hold thousands and thousands of tons of metal up in the air at like a teeter-totter, and it just broke apart. But now you have the worst moment of Titanic. The awful, awful moment of Titanic. You have 1,500 people in the water, and they're drowning. They're freezing in 20-degree water. This is actually a doll on the bottom of the Atlantic one of the robots took. And the people in the lifeboats have to listen to this. Many said it sounded like locusts on a summer night, cicadas. We hear that now, right? Go outside tonight and listen to the cicadas. They said that's what it sounded like. A lot of them said it sounded like a ball game. Home run gets hit and the crowd roars. But most of them said it was a long death moan in the same pitch. And people couldn't stand to listen to it. They covered their ears. And it haunted them for the rest of their life and their dreams. Because these people were not drowning. They were all freezing to death in the water. Right in front of them. And now let's talk about these lifeboats. These lifeboats were at best half full. Why? Because nobody understood how to load them. A lot of people thought the boats would come back. It was the first class. There was a lot of deference to them. Some people said later they thought the boats couldn't hold everybody, suspended 90 feet above the water. That's why I showed you how reinforced those boats were. So, only one boat went back. Only one boat went back to rescue, right? So there were 700 people in boats that could have held 1,175. 400 more people could have been picked up. Nobody went back. They watched everybody freeze to death, then drown. Why? Because they all said they get swamped. They said that if we go back, we're going to get swamped. We'll die. And we always hear about the famous Molly Brown. Well, she's famous because she said, let's go back. So now you are not going back. And infamous Molly Brown. And this happened on a lot of the boats. Some people said, let's go back. Other people said, no, no way. It's a horrible moment of Titanic. One of the moments that's swept under the rug. It's pushed down in history. That in this moment of sheer human disaster, all these fellow humans did not go back and help people that needed it. And they could have saved 400 more people. Now, at 3:30, people reaches nothing on. Now, the logistics were off. The longitude and latitude were off. We know this because they found the ship. But they were in the area. And more, Rostrom's looking around, and suddenly he sees a green flare. And this is, by the way, a colorized actual picture of one of the lifeboats. He goes toward the flare, and he sees in the night all these lifeboats stretched out, these 20 lifeboats. And so he immediately starts bringing them on board, but he also realizes, when the second officer, Lightoller, actually gets on board, he tells her, he said, she's gone. She went at 2:20. So the best thing you can do is pick these people up. And a lot of them are already freezing, and he has to use hoists to bring them on board, and the water's starting to kick up now. And, it's a good thing he got there when he did, because nobody else was going to make it anytime soon. And this is the reason. You could say that the rescue of the Titanic was somewhat of a successful mission, because 705 people were picked up by the Carpathia. There's another actual photo taken by a passenger on Carpathia. And you can see these people. They look cold. They've been sitting out there in the dark thinking nobody's coming to them. Although Harold Bride survived. Jack Phillips drowned. Harold Bride, one of the Marconi operators, survived. He was telling everybody, Carpathia is coming. He told everybody that. Now here are the survivors on Carpathia. And Lawrence Beasley, the schoolmaster, said it was deathly quiet. Nobody told us. And why? Because all these women lost their husbands, for one thing. But nobody was saying a word. And, people were in shock. They couldn't believe what had happened. But the whole world wants to talk to this guy, Harold Bride. Why? Because he knows the whole story. He's the surviving wireless operator of Titanic. His feet are frozen blocks of ice, and he's passed out in the makeshift infirmary. But the Marconi operator on board Carpathia is exhausted. And he literally collapses trying to send out messages back to the world about what's happening. And so Harold Bride's the only guy. Remember, we talked about how this is a very insulated world where nobody really knows this technology. Harold Bride's the only one on board that can take over. And so even though his feet are frozen, he just survived the shipwreck, he goes back to, working again and sending out these messages. One of the messages he gets is from Marconi. All right, Guglielmo Marconi strikes a deal with the New York Times for an exclusive. He's going to get paid, and Harold Bride's going to get paid $1,000. And he tells Bride, don't talk to anybody. Don't talk to anybody. I promised your story to the New York Times, and that's who you're going to tell it to. So Bride honors that, and he sends out passenger lists and things like that. People have survived, but he doesn't really tell anybody anything more. Even the president, who wants to know if his aide, Archie Butts, survived, and he did not. They don't even respond to him. Meanwhile, the California finally wakes up. What happens is one of the officers says, something happened. And he goes down to the wireless room, gets the wireless operator up, and they find out quickly Titanic sunk. They take it up to Lord. Lord says, this is impossible. This is no way this happened. They confirm it, and Lord is faced with the inescapable conclusion that that ship was the Titanic that sunk in front of him. Even then, though, he doesn't cut across the ice field, he goes around the long way. And, it takes him a long time to get to the location where she sank. Meanwhile, Carpathia is left with the survivors and heads back to New York, has extra boats, some of the boats they fished out, and are bringing them back too. When she hits the harbor, pandemonium. Reporters, all these boats full of newsmen, throwing money at the ship, trying to get stories from survivors. Some of them dive into the water, trying to climb aboard the ship. Others try and get on when the pilot from the harbor comes on board, take it in. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. But they all want the story. They want the scoop. The man who has the scoop is Harold Bride. Now, Harold Bride is still working in the wireless room. He says, "You're done. You've done your job. You don't have to send this." They have him carried off. You can see there his bandaged feet, and they take him directly to an interview with the New York Times at a hotel, where he gives New York Times, which, by the way, had already scooped everybody because all the other papers were getting this disinformation saying Titanic survived and printing that. New York Times had a hunch that Titanic had sunk, and they went with it. And that put them ahead of everybody. And then they get this. And that's when the New York Times became the New York Times. Now, the California arrives. Lord tells everybody, don't talk to the press. But of course they did. And this is what comes out. California refused to aid the Titanic. Distress rockets plainly visible at the time, says engineer. Some of the stokers would come up on board and they saw the Titanic too. Lord denies everything, says that was a Russian fishing trawler, that wasn't Titanic. But he gets pulled into the American investigation and he's grilled. And even though he tries and tries and tries to say that was not Titanic, it doesn't work. And he's found guilty of not coming to the aid of Titanic and saving countless lives. Basically, Captain Lord is disgraced for life. Stripped of his command, he ends up commanding a fertilizer ship later. He goes to his grave saying that was not the Titanic, that he was being a scapegoat. But inescapable conclusion was that he did not go to the aid. And this brought a whole conspiracy thing about that goes on to this day that people call Lordites, who believe Lord was made a scapegoat. And his son petitioned Congress to reopen the investigation in the 80s, and they did, but they found that Lord was, again, excellent. They said, even if there was another mystery ship in the area, there was only one ship shooting off rockets, and that was Titanic, and he didn't come. Now, Captain Moore, he escaped the inquiries, but his passengers, his crew talked to the press too, and said, we were right there. We could have rescued him. And Moore denied this to the press, but he also said, it's my job not to risk my ship and my crew and my passengers. So he talked out both sides of his mouth. Many, many books came out on him. So he didn't escape history entirely, but he wasn't disgraced like Captain Lord. Now, the New York Times, along with other publications, brought out as much news as they could. Again, here's some disinformation. I'll follow the ship. The last words of Captain Smith, not true. Not true at all. But you look below it, thrilling story by Titanic surviving wireless. By the way, I opened the book with Marconi meeting Bride, and Bride tells the whole story. And this was true. This was as true as you could get. He said exactly what happened, and it was carried all over the world and made the New York Times the #1 paper. Bride's account went everywhere. He got his $1,000. He later went to live with a sister to recover. He did go back to sea for a while, but then retired very early. Captain Roscoe of the Carpathia, who did do the right thing, who did risk everything to come and rescue the people, and did rescue the 705 people. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He got so many awards, you can't count them. The British Game Award, the American Award, the captain should do in this situation. It's the best of us. So was, and then things died down for a long time. Titanic took its place in history, but then a resurgence began. You can probably start to tie it to Lord's book that came out in '59, and people became fascinated. This spawned an early movie. There were several other movies. And so the sort of Titanic Renaissance began that goes on to this day. And again, of the people in the lifeboats, 1,178 people could have been saved, but only 706 were saved. So 400 people of that 1,521 that drowned would have been saved by people going back in the lifeboats. If Captain Moore had taken the Mount Temple in, he could have taken maybe 300-400. Captain Lord could have come in with California and picked up the rest. Or they all could have gotten on one of those ships and just crowded on. And this would not have happened. 1,521 people drowning in the icy Atlantic. So the mythology is that this was preordained, that there was nothing anybody could do. But the truth is, it was human failing, and that they all could have been saved. This is the actual ice field where they went back looking for the bodies. And I'm going to read you the very end of the book. We would like to think that we will react as Captain Rostrom did, weaving our way through icebergs, putting every ounce in our hands, with the only purpose being that of rescuing those in distress. Or that if we were in lifeboats and we saw the 1,500 people drowning, our lifeboat was half full, we would go back and risk getting swamped to save those we could. It's the human ideal, and it's almost impossible to know if we could go back from the ice as Captain Moore did, or refuse to recognize the ship plainly in view, find distressing rockets as Captain Lord did. The truth is, humans are a blend, and that's why we all sit back and doff our hat to the hero. They may be rarer than we like to think, but there were real heroes that night. And we are once again back to those two wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, sending out their basic human question again. It's a universal question, really, a very human cry that comes down to us through the years, and still we have to respond every time we hear it. On the Titanic, lying on the ocean floor, the wireless room from 1912 remains. And it is fitting that as of this writing, there are plans for it to be brought back to the surface by underwater robots to find out what is left. And many feel this will be a fitting tribute to Harold Bride and Jack Phillips. Perhaps there is one last message embedded in his transmitter. Undoubtedly, if they could extract that last plea, that last electromagnetic impulse, it would be that very human question we all ask one another. Will you come help us? And that is 160 minutes. And I can take questions.
All right, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat. William, I'll definitely say that your argument that the Titanic's mythology both, made it as famous as it is, but also hindered the rescue effort, I thought was a very interesting central thought. And I'm curious, looking at the actions of Lord, if you find yourself sympathizing with him because he believed in the mythology, or feeling differently because he should have just checked anyway.
Lord did not want to go into that ice field for a lot of reasons. One is it would have risked his ship. Also, two, he was a very autocratic captain. And once he made a decision, I think he had a hard time reversing. Suspicion. But then he had to cross that. And I think it was a lot of self-preservation. I think he also felt, she had stumbled into it and it was tough. I mean, to his dying day, he'll say there was this mystery ship. And you can go, when you go into Titanic books, there's all these accounts of a mystery ship out there. But as they said when they reopened the investigation, because his son wanted his father's reputation, there was only one ship out there firing off rockets. And all the officers and passengers and crewmen saw it. And that was Titanic. And he saw it. And it was just one of those moments where he did not do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we have this, we like to think everybody is a hero, but humans are a real blend, and some people like Captain Rostrum, he had it in him to do it.
Mm.
But Captain Moore, Captain Lord, they didn't want to risk it. And that's what then make it into the mythology, because when the ship went down, they wanted to put sort of a Christian model of, these heroic men and women who, women and children first, shot of brandy, a cigar, go down the ship all smart. But in fact, there was a lot of missed opportunities, and the first class did not come back and help their fellow man. And these two captains who could have come in did not come in and help them.
Very interesting. We have two questions here. First, from Joe and Diane. Was Captain Lord related to Lord, the author of the book from 1959?
No, but yeah, it is strange, isn't it? That no relation. Walter Lord was this guy living in New York who was a copywriter who would go home at night and work on his book. He interviewing people during the day and things like that. But no, I know, strange, but yes, no.
That's a funny coincidence. From Lloyd, I have been confused about the name of the other ship. Is it California or the Californian?
Actually, it's the Californian. So it is the Californian. Good question. And again, there's people on all sorts of sides of this controversy where people say, there are these strange ships out there, and Captain Moore reported there were other trawlers around. There were other ships, which again breaks the whole mythology of Titanic was out there all alone. She was not. And there were other trawlers out there. But Titanic was like a Christmas tree. I mean, this was a monstrous ship lit up in the night, shooting off rockets. There was no mistaking Titanic.
Yeah. All right. Well, William, I haven't seen any other questions, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for your presentation tonight. It was very informative and interesting.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. And also, you can go to williamhazelgrove.com, get more information on it, and you can get the book anywhere. It'll be out September 1st. I did not cover lots and lots of stuff, so the book has really the whole story.
And currently, his book is on order at the library, so when it becomes available, put it on hold. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And thank you, William, for being here. We will see you next time.
Thank you.